Well, hey all. We are in Standard 1.5C today, which is the ratification of the Constitution. Ratification is one of those weird words that we don't use very often, so you might be wondering, is that like when you turn into a mouse? The answer is no. Ratification is the process of getting something approved. Okay, in this case, we're talking about getting the Constitution itself approved by the states. So at this point, the Articles of Confederation has been tracked. The Constitution has been written. We've done all the hard work of the compromises, the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Great Compromise, the Slave Trade Compromise, which, as discussed, those are a little iffy, but it's what it is. And now they're going to send this out to the states. The fate of the Constitution and the country is in the hands of the individual states. Now, it might seem weird to you that only 9 of the 13 states had to agree to the Constitution because it took all 13 states to even amend the Constitution. I think that just shows us how seriously they realize this has to be changed. We got to do something else because the Articles is broken. Now, in 2020, it's easy for us to think, oh man, the Constitution, everybody must have loved it because we sort of revere it. We treat it as almost sacred sometimes, which is a kind of weird thing, but that's what we do, right? And yeah, there were definitely people who loved it back in the late 1700s, but there are also an awful lot of people who don't. We're going to talk about those two groups. So the group of people that love the Constitution, we call them the Federalists. They're Federalists because they like the idea of a strong federal or central government. Remember, before, we only had the states, and the states had all the power, and that was kind of a problem. They were all coining their own money. They're the only ones who could tax. They were the only ones who could make treaties, that applied to them, and so that's a big problem. So we decided in the Constitution, let's keep the states, but then let's add another government, a federal government. And the people who loved that idea loved the Constitution that set up that federal government. So they call themselves the Federalists. This included some well-known folks like Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay, who are going to work together to, let me jump to the bottom of this, they worked together to write a series of articles in New York newspapers called the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers really just explain why they think the Federalist or government, a federal government, and the Constitution are a good idea. This is something that's covered briefly in Hamilton the musical, how Alexander Hamilton writes most of them. But James Madison kicks in a pretty good number too, because after all, he largely wrote the Constitution. Okay, he's the guy that comes to the to the Constitutional Convention with this plan in hand that he called the Virginia Plan. So of course he's going to be able to explain why the Constitution is a good idea. It's largely his brainchild. Okay, now these Federalists, they are very similar. They tend to be rich guys who are merchants or other businessmen from the coasts. So Boston, New York, doesn't necessarily represent everyone, which is why you're also going to get a completely different group of people called the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists say, we're okay with amending the Articles, but we don't like how you did it. We don't like this strong federal government. We want the emphasis to be on the states. And so because they don't like this federal government, and therefore the Constitution, they are called the Anti-Federalists. These aren't rich guys who live on the coast. Most of them are backcountry farmers who have a completely different set of values than those other folks who live in the cities. Even today, you see people who vote in cities tend to vote a little bit differently than people who live out in the countryside. The Anti-Federalists, their biggest gripe is they don't want to have too much power in the central government. So specifically, they say, you better include some kind of protection for us. Tell us what rights are ours, the people's. You've written a lot about the government and the president and the Congress and the court. What about us? The Federalists are like, cool, that's good, but we're afraid if we list out your rights, that'll be all the rights you have. And so that's a little bit dangerous. And the Anti-Federalists say, yeah, but if you don't give us any rights, we don't have any proof that we have rights. I'm actually going to do a little bit of an activity about the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist writings. So look elsewhere for information about that. We're going to move on. Anti-Federalists make so much of a stink about this that it looks like the Constitution might not even get ratified. And so the Federalists give in and they write a list of 10 amendments to the Constitution. Okay, they're not going to put them in the body of the Constitution proper. These get added afterward. But I love this. I don't know if you can read it still, but number 9 takes care of that concern. It says, well, let me summarize it. It says, hey, just because we listed a bunch of rights here does not mean you don't have other rights. So yeah, you have all these rights and probably more. We just haven't thought of them yet, which is a great way of getting around their concern. The whole point of adding this in is they want to make sure that the Constitution does get ratified, and they know the Anti-Federalists have a pretty good point. So this Bill of Rights is going to include a lot of the things that you think of as your basic freedoms as an American: freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, of assembly, right to bear arms. The idea that you can have a trial by jury, you have to have a trial by jury. We shouldn't have cruel and unusual punishment, fair trials, protection from unreasonable search and seizure. So if the cops pull you over and they say, hey, I want to search your car, you don't have to say yes, okay? Now, if you're driving down the road and you're, drinking something you shouldn't, then they have reason to. Or if it smells like, illicit substances in your car, don't be like, you can't search. Yeah, they can, okay? Also, if you're driving down the road and they pull you over and they hear, help, out of the trunk, the cops are probably gonna check your car then. Okay. Now, I could go way deeper, but I think it's better for you to actually look at the Bill of Rights. And so I've given you that, and I've explained how to do those in some of the other videos. Hopefully this is helpful for you. Let me know if there's ever anything else I can do to help you. Have a good one. Whoops.